All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. I want to respect everyone's time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Laurel Rodriguez, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Sure Impact. And our topic today is cultivating the journey towards impact measurement. We are excited for our guest presenter today, Trina Willard. She is the founder of Knowledge Advisory Group. And Trina helps nonprofits and government agencies improve their programs through data-driven decision making. She has over 20 years of experience in evaluation and measurement and specializes in making data accessible and actionable. Previously, Trina was vice president at Transformation Systems, Inc. and led the evaluation unit at the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. Her background spans nonprofit, government, and business sectors. She holds a BS in psychology from Roanoke College and an MS in applied experimental psychology from Virginia Tech. So, just a quick note before we start, feel free to submit any questions you have for Trina in the chat. And with that, we will go ahead and turn the time over to Trina.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Laurel. Thanks to everyone for being here on this holiday week and joining us for what is always a hot topic in my part of the world, and which is impact measurement. As Laurel was sharing that introduction, I realized I've just tipped over the 30-year mark actually in evaluation. So 3 decades in doing this work, which obviously must be something I enjoy quite a bit to be hanging with it for that long. Thanks to everyone again for being here. It's about 1 o'clock in my time zone. I know some of you are still in the morning, but I will dive on in so we can talk a bit about impact measurement and outcomes measurement. This is a very large topic, so we're obviously just doing a brief overview today, but I look forward to hearing any of your thoughts and questions as we go along, and hopefully we'll have a little time at the end for questions as well. So first, I just wanted to kind of speak about the elephant in the room. Like, what is impact? What do we mean by that? So impact generally refers to the tangible changes or results that an organization generates in alignment with its mission, its vision, and its strategic goals. We hear the word impact being used in different ways, though. That's probably something that you've experienced, and I've experienced that as well over my career. So sometimes we hear the word impact being used by development professionals in nonprofits and by communicators and marketers as meaning reach. So sometimes we hear the word impact meaning the number of donors that we have secured. Folks like myself and many of the folks at Sure Impact, um, as evaluators, we speak about impact as meaning results in your target population, those whom you are serving. And then funders and government agencies that also provide funding sometimes use impact to mean um, the results that are happening in the community. So, really high level, big level community change. So, it's one of those terms that is sometimes used differently depending on whom you're speaking with. So, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that up front. But in my world, in the world of program evaluation, and in many contexts around nonprofits and government, when we say impact, we are speaking about results most specifically. So let's talk a little bit about program evaluation, which is the process by which we determine or measure impact. So, program evaluation, here's a definition that I like to use for that. It's carefully collecting and analyzing information about a program or some aspect of a program in order to make necessary decisions. So there's two primary slides in this deck that will be shared with you, I think, after the session, if I'm understanding correctly. Um, and there's two that I want to make particular note of. This is one of them. And if you take anything away today, the last 6 words in this definition are quite important. So, program evaluation is a process, obviously, by which we share information with target audiences of interest, like our funders, our boards, our staff, the community, etc. But its core purpose is really for us internally who provide services to be able to make decisions about what we do next. So, are we where we make improvements? What are those opportunities for improvement, opportunities for change? So, that is its most important purpose, and it has other purposes as well. But I do want to just highlight that as we kind of launch in. Now, the type of evaluation you undertake to improve your program really depends on what you need to learn. And there are many different types of program evaluation. There are probably upwards towards maybe 12 to 14 different distinct types of program evaluation. I'm going to focus today on two different types, which are process and outcome evaluation. So, process evaluations really are descriptions of what you do, how much you produce, and how you do it. So, that's all about you as the provider and your workload. Outcome evaluations reflect on the changes that have occurred within the client, the member, or the system that results from the activities or the services that you're providing. So we're going to delve into that just a little bit more. You may be familiar with different terms just like in grant writing, in evaluation, sometimes folks use different semantics for similar things. So you may be familiar with the terms formative and summative evaluation, which are very in alignment with these two terms that I'm sharing today, process and outcomes. So sometimes we have different specifics that we use, but I wanted to share this semantic choice here, and there are others that you may hear throughout your experiences as well. All right, so why is program evaluation and impact measurement important? We already know that you have very full plates in the nonprofit sector and in the government sector as well. For those of you who may be tuning in that are in those fields, your plates are pretty full. And why is it important for us to spend time on data and data collection? So, I want to share a little bit about why we see that as important and why we see that happening. So, there's both external pressures and internal motivators for program evaluation efforts. Those external pressures are things that I'm sure you can relate to quite a bit in the current climate that we're in now. That includes things like increased public scrutiny, which is not a new event. It is certainly highlighted currently. Nonprofits and government agencies both have a tremendous amount of attention on their activities, what they're doing, and what sort of results they are producing. We also see the benefit of program evaluation when we are in conditions of economic decline, because those are situations where resources for services tend to contract and demands for services increase. And we also see pressures that can benefit from program evaluation when we look at the accountability of funders. So, funders have to be accountable to their own boards. They have difficult decisions to make, and organizations that stand out are better able to garner their attention. So, all of those things combined are good reasons why having data that really demonstrates what you've been able to achieve can be very beneficial for the sustainability and the effectiveness of your organization. Those internal motivators are continuous improvement. So, every organization has room for improvement. Are you making the case that your organization adopts this mindset? So, do you think about what you're doing? Do you reflect on your services and how effective they are, how efficient you're being? There's always room for improvement, and those also tend to reveal those opportunities where we can go to a funder and request assistance. So when we're able to better identify where those opportunities for improvement are, we're also better able to actually make funding requests that target in on those deficits, if you will. And then another one of those internal motivations is greater mission focus. So evaluation data helps us determine whether we're focusing our time and our energy and our activities that are actually supporting our mission. Now, in using data, then we can see benefits to the efficiency of our work. So we can target our time to do a few different things. We can create messaging and messages that are important to our stakeholders and our funders. We're better able, with data, we're better able to demonstrate results for the client or for our target population, whomever that may be. We can then focus our time on effective practices to ensure that we are being good stewards of public and private funds. And then we can also make intentional improvements based on what we know, based on data and evidence, rather than just guessing and experimenting, which can be quite time consuming, actually. All right, so thinking about this, I'm sure at least a few of you are here today because you know program evaluation is important and impact measurement is important, but your organization may have struggled a little bit to get that off of the ground. And that can be a little stressful at times, as exemplified by the gentleman in this photograph. So this could be because you haven't created a clear and actionable measurement strategy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the building blocks for that. So the first aspect of evaluation planning is actually one that's quite often overlooked, and that is capacity. And by capacity, I'm specifically referring right now to people. So, who are the people that can help us get an evaluation effort started, get it off the ground, keep it moving, and have it ultimately become a part of our systematic practice rather than something that we're doing whenever a grant report might be due, for example? So there's a couple of different aspects I wanted to mention here. The first is looking for a champion. Who is the champion in your organization? That could be a board member, it could be a leader in the organization. This person is generally sort of carrying the flag for all the reasons why evaluation is important and keeps it in the forefront. Generally speaking, someone who is in leadership who can take on that champion role is more effective and can communicate with authority to the organization. And that person also sees this as important in such a way that a lens for impact and evaluation is integrated into communications on a regular basis. The other layer to this is identifying someone, or perhaps more than one person, who can implement and propel evaluation efforts forward. So, this ideally should be someone in your organization who is curious and has a passion for details. We sometimes see that, especially in smaller organizations, that evaluation is kind of tacked onto someone else's job description. And oftentimes that person may not be someone who's very excited or interested in digging into details. So someone who is more of a visionary is probably not the individual who's going to be great and excited about getting into the details of data and evaluation. So thinking about aligning someone on your team with that sort of task can be important. So choosing someone who has that compatible mindset, who's curious and detail oriented. Also, someone who is a clear communicator and can take these sometimes very complex concepts and boil them down into more concise types of messages. We often see in organizations that, especially smaller nonprofits, that team members may need some professional development and evaluation. In many cases, service providers don't have very strong training in their fields in data and evaluation. So they may need some supplemental support in that regard. And then also, one element of this is giving that person the authority to dedicate time to these sorts of tasks. Again, rather than it just being something that's seen as an extra job duty, one of the many, many hats that they may be wearing at the time. So, some of the questions that we suggest that you think through when you're trying to consider the implementation of an evaluation process are things like who's responsible for actually creating the evaluation strategy, which we're going to dig into in just a moment. Who's actually responsible for collecting the evaluation data? That may be individuals within your organization. Sometimes it might be individuals that are external to your organization as well. For example, if you have an education focused nonprofit and you need data from the school systems that you work with, for example. Also, who's responsible for analyzing the evaluation data? Now, this is something that either needs to be done by someone who has possession of those data, or you can look to systems that can actually assist with analysis, sure, impact being one of those potentially. But there needs to be consideration in your evaluation planning as you're developing this strategy as to who's actually going to take on that role. What we see very often is that it's really not thought about until sort of the end of a grant cycle or when a report is due. And then all the data is pulled together, but it's not actually been analyzed. And we're trying to do that kind of at the last minute, which doesn't give us a lot of time to really do that thoughtfully and carefully, especially if folks don't feel like very confident in those kinds of strategies. And then finally, who's responsible for overseeing evaluation efforts? That usually lies with, of course, leadership of the organization, but also the board. It's a best practice in nonprofit organizations that the board has oversight over not only ensuring that evaluation is funded and resourced within the organization, that it's actually being conducted, but also that the evaluation and impact data is being used to make decisions, as I referenced earlier, and to communicate to interested parties such as funders and donors. All right, so the people piece is the first kind of building block to your measurement strategy. The second is the process. And we're going to dig into that a little bit in a little bit more depth during our time together. That piece I'm going to zone in on a little bit. So the second step is developing that process for evaluating, which includes your measures and your tools and the steps that you take. So first, an important aspect of evaluation planning is developing your evaluation questions. So here's a few things to think about creating evaluation questions. They might spark some ideas for you on the types of questions you'd like to declare for your organization. And those are things like, what results do we want to demonstrate? What are the benefits that we want to claim for our organization? Um, Sort of on the flip side, what challenges do we have? What information do we need to make decisions about how to improve and to make those targeted funding requests to donors and others about the areas where we need additional support, where we are challenged? And then a third question to kind of spark here is what questions do you continue to be asked by stakeholders that you have difficulty answering? What questions do you continue to be asked by stakeholders that you have difficulty answering? That's another critical question you may think about with regards to collecting data for evaluation purposes. Now, some other issues to sort out on the process side, you can see on this slide, are what outcomes will you measure? So I mentioned earlier that outcomes are those changes in your target population. Identifying what outcomes you want to measure is a critical piece of evaluation planning. Impact and outcomes measurement has been um, really a very important part of evaluation for, I would say, is about 30 to 35 years. So it was emerging as I began in the field in the 1990s. And that is a trend that I see not waning in any way during my career. I think that's going to continue. We have moved from a climate of, if you will, sort of counting widgets, counting our work, counting our productivity, to really focusing in on what sort of results we have as we conduct this work. So identifying those specific outcomes is an important part of the planning process and that measurement strategy. That includes how you're going to define each of those outcomes, becoming more precise about what we mean. For example, let's say one of your desired outcomes is you want to increase employment. I've had that conversation with many of our clients over the years, and employment can mean many different things. It can mean full-time, 40-hour a week employment with benefits. It can mean part-time hourly work. It can mean under the table cash work, transitional work. It can mean many different things. It could mean all of those things, but how you define it will really dictate what you measure and how you measure it. So defining each of those data points is quite important. Now, along with that, you also want to think about the tools that you're going to use for measurement and who's actually responsible for collecting the data. Usually, in most organizations, there's multiple people who are responsible for different aspects of data collection. And then also another piece of this process of your measurement strategy is thinking about the timeline. What are the opportunities for collecting the data? And that's going to be contingent somewhat on the cycle that you use for actually delivering the services. So, thinking those timelines through proactively is also an important part of the process. And then, after you kind of go through those first two steps of your measurement strategy, which is the people capacity side and the process piece, then we start thinking about the system. So it's people, process, system. After you've sorted out the people in the process, you can turn to selecting the systems you need to support evaluation. So this looks like, of course, documenting the processes first and then choosing the most simple solution that's going to get the job done. What we see sometimes, or actually pretty frequently, is that organizations look for the system first. They look for a tool because they believe the tool is going to solve the other issues. And that's usually not very successful. Software systems, databases, Excel sheets, etc. They're all tools to be able to do the work, but you need to give them the information to be able to do it appropriately. So they have to be built accordingly. And this measurement strategy allows you to actually build these systems so that they can work for you. Now, who's going to be involved in identifying that system? It should include a number of different parties. If you're a very, very small organization, you may not have a number of staff, but it does require a couple of different roles to be involved. So, of course, leadership, those who make decisions about financial investment and so forth, data entry personnel, who are those who have to use the system to actually enter information, and that's usually the people who are most involved in these efforts that we've seen historically. But the other parties may not be as involved, which can work against you. Having data analysts involved in the conversations about choosing a system is critically important. The people who are going to actually analyze the data must understand how it works, and they can also give you great perspective on what the pitfalls of a system may be, but only if they're involved up front can you do that proactively. So having data analysts involved is very important as well. All this kind of leads to how we can use, consume, and actually compile these data for reporting, not only internally for our purposes, but also to others as they are interested. All right, so let's talk for a few minutes, turn our attention to determining what to measure for your program. This is a question we get quite often. What are the right things to measure? Now, this can take some planning, but when you get clear about what the right measures are, it's almost sort of like magic kind of moving forward. So let's take a look at this. I want to introduce you to one of my favorite tools. It's called a logic model. And some of you may be familiar with logic models because many funders use them or require them. Other funders may not, but a logic model is always a great addition to any grant proposal because it shows clearly your intention to create results, how to measure them, and what you plan to report back. So let's talk about this part in a little more depth. And again, this is part of the process step of your measurement strategy. So the logic model is there's another type of framework out there called a theory of change that some of you may have seen or used or heard about. Theory of change is a little more common in academic circles as opposed to a real world nonprofit and government circles. They're very similar, but the theory of change tends to be have more narrative, have more explanation. They're usually more complex. And our approach, at least to logic models, is to try to keep those as concise and straightforward as possible so that a multitude of audiences can actually use and consume them and understand our programs. And that also echoes for your board and your staff, the entire team really understanding your programs the same way. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what this looks like. So the logic model succinctly articulates the linkage between the problem you wish to address or the conditions you wish to address, your program activities or services, and your program outcomes, which are those short and long-term results. Now, why can these be important? They really help us maintain a focus on our mission. So we should always, it's sort of like your North Star. Like if you have a robust, compelling logic model, you will go back to it all the time. You will look at it when you're trying to consider new services or new programs. You will look at it when you are considering your budget. You will bring it to your strategic planning process. It will be something that you would share as a framework for your marketing team. All of those types of things. So it can be used for a number of ways to making sure you are focusing on your mission as well as the results that are actually achievable and important for you. So it really has three primary purposes. First off, it's actually a great tool to use for program design. So if there's anyone in the room here today that is a newer nonprofit, if you're kind of a startup and you're beginning a new program, you can actually use a logic model process to help you articulate that program with clarity. So it just helps you define as you're developing that program initiative. So it guides the design and ensures you're still in alignment with the mission. It also does double duty by providing a framework for program evaluation, which is the specific purpose we're discussing today. So it helps you identify the most critical data you should collect to report back to funders and stakeholders. So program design and program evaluation are obviously very interconnected as your evaluation tests whether your design was implemented as intended and whether the desired results were achieved. And then finally, the logic model can also be used as a communication tool. So it becomes a focal point for conversations with potential collaborators, community partners, with your funders, and with everybody on your team. So a couple different ways you can use this. is to pinpoint program refinement. So you're collecting data based on your logic model framework to pinpoint program refinements. You can use this as an onboarding tool for staff, and new board members. It's also a great conversation piece for ensuring you have language that is aligned across your team. Just like that example I gave you earlier about employment. What do we actually mean by this? We've had that conversation with the organizations where we found that, five people sitting in a room who worked together every day had totally different definitions of what employment meant. So it helps us make sure that the language that we're using, we're actually transforming that into a definition that everyone understands. It does help you create powerful grant proposals because, again, it shows that clear intention, and it can be used as that evaluation framework to help you portray your impact. So this is an example of an actual logic model that was developed for a wellness program for older adults. You can see this kind of left to right. I'm not going to go into it in exhaustive detail just to be respectful of everyone's time today. But this is an example. So there are many different formats for logic models. If you were to go out to Google right now and type in logic model, you'd see a lot of different pictures of what they look like. Some of them go left to right, some of them go up and down, some of them are kind of twisty and turvy, but they're typically a graphic of some sort. I like this one because it's logical in its nature. We read from left to right, so that's kind of a natural progression for how people look at it. And you can see that essentially it goes from these existing conditions, which would be the kind of data that you would use to demonstrate that there's a need in your community or in your target population, the kinds of things that you might put in a needs justification in a grant proposal. Those would be your existing conditions. You have these program components and program activities, which essentially work together. They're aligned together. The activities are the client-facing things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis with your participants or your target population. The program components are essentially how we group those activities and sort of functions. So the program components becomes in essence your elevator pitch for your program. It can help you describe very succinctly, these are the four things in this example. These are the four things that we're doing in the wellness program. We're providing nutrition, group leisure and recreation, health education and advocacy, and transportation, which very often sparks the more detailed conversation about what those specific activities are. Um, but we do find that the program components can be a very compelling way to speak with decision makers who don't have a lot of time to understand our program in more detail. So the components and the activities work together. And then the program outputs and outcomes, I'm going to speak to a little bit more in just a moment. But essentially, again, the outputs are your process measures. So these are measures of your workload, and the outcomes are reflect changes for your clients. All right, so let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. So process data examines activity or output or efficiency, and those are things like the number and type of service hours provided, individuals trained, workshops held, applications processed. All of that is about your workload. Those are what reflect you. So anytime you say we provide, you're speaking in process or output language. The outcomes data reflect on effectiveness and results and impact in the longer term. So those can include changes in the client's circumstances, which can be awareness, knowledge, behaviors, etc. So you can see the two examples I have here. The example of process data is average contact time with participants. That's about you and what you provided. And outcomes data, an example would be the percentage of participants who demonstrate increased knowledge of stroke warning signs. So I'll show you just a few more examples of those. So these are outputs, which capture the quantity of services You can see here 200 individuals trained, 40 workshops delivered, 5 applications for benefits submitted. And then outcomes, which again are the benefits or the changes for your program participants. They flow logically from the activities and they can be short or long term. Now, this is the second slide that I mentioned that I want to make you aware of that I think is quite important. And these are the types of outcomes that you might want to think about for your client population. So there's 6 primary buckets of outcomes that we look at. And this is how we start to have the conversation and decide on what we want to specifically measure in our measurement strategy for impact. So those are changes in access, changes in awareness, and specifically usually awareness of community resources that an individual could use on their own in the future. Changes in knowledge, changes in attitude, meaning changing their position on a particular topic, changes in skills that they can apply in the future, and changes in behavior. Changes in behavior. So they're actually making different decisions on as to what they are choosing to do. All right. Now, there are short-term and then long-term outcomes, as I mentioned earlier, and the short-term outcomes are typically representing achievements or improvements that occur during or immediately after program participation ends. And the timing of that is going to be different for every program because every program has a different cycle of delivery. So there's no hard and fast rule as to, a short-term outcome is within the first 6 months. That's not necessarily the case. It depends on the cycle of your program delivery. But as a rule of thumb, they are occurring during or immediately after program participation ends. And then those longer term outcomes are typically occurring over some extended period of time. And I just have an example here for you to take a look at that's the difference between the two. So the short-term outcome might be for youth participating in a dropout prevention program that they improve school attendance. And then the long-term outcome would be that youth participating in a dropout prevention program stay in school and graduate. And you can see from that example, just thinking about if your dropout prevention program is occurring, let's say in the 8th grade, 7th or 8th grade, that providing data on school attendance is something you can do pretty immediately. You can do that within the school year. You can do that within a grant cycle. But actually assessing this long-term outcome is going to require 4 or 5 years of follow-up, which may be completely outside of a grant cycle, for example, if you are reporting on grant funding. But it could be a long-term goal that you want to articulate, but perhaps for the purposes of that commitment, not indicate that you're going to have that data during that grant cycle. And then I just wanted to provide 2 exercises here that you might want to play around with after the session with your team. The first one is just a very simple way of thinking about how you identify the outcomes that you want to assess and what is achievable to measure. So this really is taking a look at um, you have an in column and an out column. So the in column refers to what access awareness, knowledge, attitude, skills, and behaviors do participants display when they come into our program. And then the out column would refer to what access awareness, knowledge, attitude, skills, and behaviors do we hope they display when they finish their services with us. And the change between those two things are what your opportunities for measurement are. The change between those two things are what your opportunities for measurement may be. And then I have one other quick exercise here that I'll leave with you, which is how to sort of take stock on whether your impact measurement strategy is in place. So this might include going through these 4 steps to, make a list of all the services or programs that you provide. Note the most recent date on which you actually reviewed the evaluation strategy. So that would include potentially a logic model, but identifying all those things that were on that process slide that I showed you earlier. Assessing the current state of evaluation for each of those services or programs. So, are you doing anything at this point? Are you collecting feedback only, which is not process data or outcomes data? Or are you collecting some process information, about your workload with regards to a program, but not really delving into results or outcomes, which would be, of course, the most advanced type. And then also thinking about the timetable on which you are analyzing or reviewing evaluation data for each of those programs or services. All right, just a couple of additional things, and I'll wrap us up for so we can have some Q&A if you like. Um, uh, with regards to assessing tools to measure against your logic model. A couple of different tips here. So the first thing I would say is to use the most simple tool for the job. There are a lot of complicated tools out there. If you are a smaller to medium-sized nonprofit, chances are that you don't need those very complicated tools, and probably don't have the people capacity to use those types of tools. Um, Tools again they help us do our work more efficiently and better. They don't replace the need or the value of human capacity to ask questions and to do detailed analysis. But there are certainly some tools that I'm going to talk about in just a minute that we do really like and recommend that do a good job for evaluation. There are a lot of measurement tools and checklists and questionnaires and things of that sort that are available in the public domain. Those are often very helpful because they are free or very low cost. So tools that you design are also another possibility. And as long as they're grounded in social science research principles. Um, with regards to software, things to keep in mind here is that even though some vendors might offer you software packages for free, you do need to take into consideration that there's always staff time that's involved. And sometimes with free options, the staff time can be fairly significant. So be very careful when you are reviewing or when other people in your organization are recommending that you take advantage of something that's no cost, particularly if it's a board member who may not really understand what is involved for the staff to kind of do the care and feeding on those sorts of tools. And then the other thing I just want to mention here quickly on that is this note you see about don't use a fork to eat soup. Many nonprofits in particular like to try to use tools that they already are paying for, they already have to collect client data and to do evaluation. That doesn't work very well. And it's for one very specific reason, which is those tools are generally speaking have not been created to collect client level service data, nor are they equipped to conduct analysis generally speaking. So you have to do a lot of manipulation and configuration to make those work the way you need them to. Having said that, there are some tools that we really like and suggest that you may consider for evaluation purposes. One of them is Sure Impact, which is why we're here today, because we are very excited about their software package and how it is actually built on an evaluation framework. It is specifically designed in a way that provides you with the opportunity to compile evaluation data, and it builds reports based on that logic model kind of premise. So it is specifically evaluation focused. Um, for organizations that are smaller and don't need those sorts of tools, SurveyMonkey is a really good software package that's fairly economical that can do a lot of things. And it's a good way to collect feedback or collect data on specific individuals. And sometimes, you can use something really simple that's already in in on your computer, which is often something like a in the Microsoft Office suite, like Excel. So, just a couple of parting thoughts, and I'll turn things back over to Laurel. So, nonprofits do need systems for data collection, storage, and analysis, and software is very helpful, but it can't address those capacity and process issues. So, those two things, those two steps of your measurement strategy really should be thought about first. And then, after you have that in place, then you can really support using a software system to its maximum advantage. A couple of things you want to focus on in reporting on outputs are counting what you provide, describing who you serve, and then compiling your level of output, your level of effort. And then, of course, measuring outcomes shows those changes for your client population. And those can be found or collected, compiled through case records or databases, case management plans, surveys, interviews, focus groups, and checklists. All right, so that's a very quick overview of impact measurement and measurement strategy. So, with that, I appreciate your time and thoughts today and look forward to hearing any questions you might have based on that brief presentation.
Thank you so much for that, Trina. And
Thank
we
you.
appreciate there was a comment in the chat that said, "Thank you. This is one of the best explanations of a logic model, and it's used in program project development and evaluation." So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for that. So okay, and again, I encourage everyone to submit any questions that you have in the chat. The first question that we have. What are some of the process and capacity issues you recommend nonprofits address before looking into purchasing software?
Yeah, some of the process and capacity issues. So, generally speaking, let's start with step number one, which is people. So, for capacity issues, what we often see is that nonprofits may not be intentional about considering who is actually going to be responsible for data collection and especially data analysis. So, having the choices made about who's going to take on those tasks proactively, not retroactively. I've received phone calls multiple times over the years from individuals who have been collecting data for months and months and months, and they're getting ready to submit a report, and they've not given any consideration to how to actually analyze the data. And then they are essentially kind of putting themselves in a situation where they're having to do this in a very rushed fashion. They're having to spend money they didn't expect to or didn't plan for on an external resource to help them and things of that type. So some of those questions that I mentioned earlier about, who's responsible for developing the strategy, who's responsible for collecting the data, who's responsible for analyzing the data, all of those things can have elements of doing them internally, and some of them can be done externally. But making the decisions is a really important piece of that, as well as potentially resourcing it differently. So you may need some external support depending on the size of your organization. And those kinds of decisions need to be brought before your leadership, brought before your board. Your development department may even be able to access capacity building funding for you to support some of these efforts. We're funded that way quite often, honestly. And, with regards to the systems piece, those can be funded also through capacity building. I'm sorry, not capacity building, but through capital campaign grants sometimes. So there's a lot of different ways to think about this, but it can't be done in a rush at the end. It is always going to be more successful if you're planning for that up front. Now, with regards to the process piece, again, kind of going back to that slide, thinking about what we want to measure. What do we actually think we can claim realistically that we're going to change for our client population? And that is, again, something that we sometimes are not being quite as intentional about as we could. Sometimes that happens because we're inundated with a lot of data and we sort of think something that we can use has got to be here, right? Like we think we have a lot of information and then it's always sort of a surprise that we can't answer questions that are being asked of us. But that's where we're given the cue that we need to sort of be the masters of our own destiny here. We need to stand strongly in what we believe we can change, make sure we're collecting those data so we can report on them. And then those open up very, very compelling conversations with funders. I mean, I've talked to funders about this a lot over my time in the field, and they want to know from nonprofits what they feel like they can actually demonstrate. And sometimes organizations want to be able to say, well, we can reduce the recidivism rate in the city of Richmond, or, we can increase affordable housing in the city of Richmond, or something of that sort. But one organization alone is very unlikely to be able to change those community measures. And we need to be able to have that conversation as well. This is how we can contribute to everyone else who's contributing in this space. But we can't do this on our own, nor can the level of impact that we can have is going to be dependent upon the support that we have. So that can really open up a lot of conversations with funders, which is actually a little bit of a teaser for kind of our next webinar that we'll have in a few weeks. So thank you for that question. I hope that answered some of that.
Yes, thank you for that. And we will talk a little bit about the next webinar coming up when we conclude in a few minutes. We have a couple of questions about logic models. And so I want to start with the first one.
Okay.
So, speaking about what we believe we're able to change, how do you recommend an organization start building a logic model if they don't already have one?
Uh, it really starts with a conversation. It requires typically, if you are a larger organization, small to medium size, and you have multiple staff, um, I would gather them together and start talking about, first of all, why are we here? What's the evidence that we have that we are providing services to address a problem that has been demonstrated? So, what are those existing conditions? Getting clear on that first. Like, what are we actually trying to shift? What problem are we addressing? And this can also include, those conversations can include your board members as well. And if you're a very small nonprofit or a startup, it may be a conversation amongst your board members that initiate this. So, first of all, talking about why are we here? Some of that's mission, but also what is the data that tells us there's a problem that we can shift or change? And then speaking about what your plan is for the activities that you are providing that are client facing. So when I say that, I mean, let's not focus for the purpose of having a conversation to create a logic model. Let's not focus on how we're marketing or how we're staffing or how we're developing our team. Let's talk about what we're doing with our clients and why. Like what do we expect to come from a one-day conference? What do we expect to happen if we bring folks in once a week for 3 months for a case management meeting? What do we expect to happen? So thinking very intentionally about each of those client-facing sorts of efforts, and then identifying again, kind of going back to that in and out rubric that I provided, which it's not even a rubric, it's just two columns. And it's a very I found it to be one of the most interesting sparks for conversation that I've ever seen, is just to think through What kind of access do our clients have when they walk in the door? What sort of awareness do they have of the community resources available to them? What sort of knowledge do they have about the issues that they are facing and the solutions that they can work on? What sort of attitudes do they have about their own self-sufficiency, for example, or their ability to refuse illicit substances? What sort of skills do they have in creating a resume or conducting an interview for a job or things of that type? And then what sort of choices are they making when it comes to behaviors? So thinking about just having that conversation, like what do our clients look like when they come to us on these different dimensions? And what do we hope to see? Like who's a success story? And how did they change? What did that look like? And is that what we're expecting to be able to replicate for other participants?
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer.
Sure.
So the other question about logic models says, you mentioned using our logic model to onboard staff. What are some ideas for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the logic model really should be, as I said, I kind of use the term North Star. Like this is who we are and why we're here. Like this is what we are doing. This is what we're focusing on, and this is what we hope to be able to achieve. And in addition to that, these are our priorities for data collection and measurement that will allow us to, number one, be in partnership with our funders so we can sustain funding. And number two, allow us to be able to make decisions about the clients that you are serving on a day-to-day basis so that we can improve their circumstances. Most people who work in nonprofits are there because they have a heart connection to the clients. They are not there because they want to collect data. They are not there because it's a very lucrative sort of field. They're there because they have that heart connection to the clients. Showing them the connection between the data that they will be responsible for collecting and I would also say elevating that in position descriptions in your performance appraisal process, those type of infrastructure items in your HR systems, all of that is related in my mind. So showing them how those data collection responsibilities are not busy work, but they are actually critical for us to decide how we can better serve our clients and serve more people in need.
That's great. I had never thought about the idea of using the logic model for job descriptions and the HR system, all of that. I think that would really help focus, right, the organization on, like you said, the North Star.
Yeah, and it sets expectations in a way that where everyone kind of sees their role in evaluation and why it's important. And it's part of building a strong evaluation culture.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, Trina, for sharing your expertise today. Thank you, everyone who has attended. If you have any follow-up questions for Trina, her email address is on the slide,
Oh, whoops.
was on the slide.
I'll go back to
I'll
that.
go ahead and send it out also in the follow-up email. I will be sending out the recording and slides tomorrow. Also, as we mentioned, Trina is going to be doing another webinar with us. It's on July 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it's called Speaking the Same Language, Engaging Funders in Meaningful Conversation about Outcomes and Impact. So we'll make sure to send you the registration link for that as well. So thank you again, everyone, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time today. And thank you, Laurel, and Sure Impact for hosting.
And thank you, Trina. Bye, everybody.